Who was Pontius Pilate? Pontius Pilate had been a fairly competent governor over the small provinces, which is why Emperor Tiberius kept him as procurator of Judea for 10 years. But although he was a reasonably good administrator, he was a coward in moral matters. As a person, he lacked a few instincts, which prevented him from understanding the Jewish soul. Pilate was not a religious man. He was someone who completely shut himself off from it and dismissed anything related to it as nonsense. He did not realize that these Hebrews had a genuine religion, a faith for which they were willing to die, and that throughout the Roman Empire, several million Jews looked to Jerusalem as the sanctuary of their faith, and that they respected the authority of the Sanhedrin as the highest court on earth. Pilate had developed a deep-seated dislike for the Jews in his heart. He had come to despise them and regarded them as a backward people. It must be noted here that of all the Roman provinces, Judea was by far the most difficult to govern. Pilate never had a clear understanding of the nature of the Jewish problems, yet he was the authority who had to make the final decisions. His inability to comprehend the Jewish soul explains why, at the beginning of his tenure as governor, he made a series of nearly disastrous mistakes. Shortly after his appointment, he lost the favor of the Jews by not taking their deeply ingrained prejudice against all forms of images seriously. The Roman legions stationed in Jerusalem had long ago removed the emperor's likeness from their banners because any form of human image was offensive to the devout Jew. Pilate found this overly exaggerated and allowed the Romans to display their emperor's likeness. He had no idea what kind of energy he was unleashing, for the next morning a large crowd gathered in protest. This demonstration lasted for 5 days, and the Jewish leaders pleaded with him to remove the images from the military standards. He flatly refused to grant their request and threatened to have them executed on the spot. Pilate was not a religious man. He was limited to philosophy and was influenced by Greek skeptical thinking. He did not understand that people with strong religious feelings would not hesitate to die for their convictions. He was therefore shocked when these Jews defiantly stood before his palace, bowed their faces to the ground, and let him know that they were willing to die. Pilate then realized that he had made a threat he would not carry out. He had to give in and ordered that the images be removed from the banners of his soldiers. However, the moral defeat had already been suffered because he noticed from that day on that he was greatly dependent on the whims of the Jewish leaders who had discovered his weak spot, that he made threats he dared not carry out. Not long afterward, he again got into trouble after granting permission for Herod's palace to be adorned with shields. However, these shields were used in a Roman ceremony, and therefore they smelled of idolatry to the Jews. When the Jews protested, Pilate was unyielding. He refused to heed their protests, and the Jews promptly appealed to Rome. Pilate then became acquainted with the powerful lobby of the Jewish diaspora because the emperor personally reprimanded him, and the offensive shields had to be removed, causing Pilate to lose face. But the Jews came to outright hate him when he dared to take money from the temple treasury. Pilate used this money to finance a new aqueduct to improve the water supply for the millions of visitors who came to Jerusalem during the major religious festivals. It had seemed fair to him because foreign visitors only paid temple tax and were not otherwise taxed for staying in Jerusalem. However, the Jews believed that only the Sanhedrin had the right to decide on the temple funds, and they continued to strongly protest against Pilate. Despite the money being well spent, they feared that Pilate might make more withdrawals from the treasury in the future. At least 20 riots followed, most of which were bloodily suppressed by Roman soldiers. In the last outbreaks, a large group of Galileans was slaughtered, and it was later whispered that they had nothing to do with the uprising. They were said to have been trapped just as they were about to perform their religious duties at the temple. Due to these blunders, the Jewish leaders had gained power over him. When they wanted to influence his decisions, they only needed to threaten an uprising to make Pilate capitulate quickly. The Jews knew that Pilate was afraid of them, that he feared losing his position with Emperor Tiberius, and they took advantage of this knowledge on several occasions. It is telling that this indecisive Roman ruler sacrificed Jesus because of his fear of the Jews, fearing that he might lose his position. 6 years later, Pilate was eventually deposed by the emperor due to an unnecessary massacre of the Samaritans. At that time, a prophet had arisen among the Samaritans who claimed that God had revealed to him where the Ark of the Covenant was buried. Thousands of Samaritans gathered at their holy mountain, Mount Gerizim, and daily they dug on the mountainside, searching for the Ark and the old temple treasures. When nothing was found, fierce uprisings broke out, which were eventually bloodily suppressed by Roman soldiers. As a result of this event, Pilate was ordered to return to Rome. However, Emperor Tiberius died while Pilate was still on his way to Rome, and the new emperor did not reappoint him as procurator of Judea. He would never fully overcome his feelings of guilt and regret over his involvement in the crucifixion of Jesus. When he could not find favor in the eyes of the new emperor, he retired to the province of Lausanne in what is now France, where he later committed suicide. Claudia Procula, Pilate's wife, had heard much about Jesus from her servants. After Pilate's death, Claudia became a prominent figure among those dedicated to spreading the gospel. All of this explains much of what happened on that tragic Friday morning. It is not difficult to understand why the Jews dared to dictate to Pilate, and why they even dared to summon him at 6 o'clock in the morning to interrogate Jesus, and also why they did not hesitate to threaten to accuse him of treason to the emperor if he dared to reject their demand to put Jesus to death. Jesus himself showed no sign of interest in Pilate's well-intentioned but half-hearted attempts to secure his release. He truly pitied Pilate and sincerely tried to enlighten his darkened mind. He remained completely passive to every appeal that the Roman governor made to the Jews to withdraw their charges of crimes. A worthy Roman governor, who had not become entangled with the Jewish leaders, would never have allowed these bloodthirsty religious fanatics to put a man to death whom he himself had found innocent and without blame. Rome made a grave mistake, an error in worldly affairs with far-reaching consequences when it sent the mediocre Pilate to govern Judea. Tiberius would have done better to send his best provincial governor to the Jews.